Hi, and welcome to the second episode of the Excel to Power BI series. I'm Dave from Automation and Answers. If you missed our first episode on pivot tables, you can watch it by clicking the link in the top right corner of the screen or in the video description. Today we're going to cover Power Pivot. Imagine you've got a customers table, a products table, and a sales table, and they're all located in different files. But you want to use the data from all three to do a profit analysis. Well, you can do that with Power Pivot. In fact, that's what we'll do in this tutorial using these 5 steps. Create data model, add relationships, add new columns, add measures and KPIs, and finally, we'll bring it all together by building a pivot table. So let's dig in and get things set up. The links to these example files are in the description. Let's do a quick overview of this tutorial's 3 example files: customers, products, and sales. In the customers file, we have a sheet called customers sheet. On that sheet, we have a table called customers table. I'm using these longer descriptive names because when we create our data model, it'll help us understand where the data really comes from. In the customer table, we have the columns customer name, city, country, and customer type. Our preferred customers are the ones located in our expansion markets, Canada and Mexico, and thus they get a special discount on their purchases. Lastly, as you can see, we've applied the same format as table feature that we used in the first episode. In fact, we've applied it to each table in each example file in this tutorial. Next, let's check out the products file. In the products file, we have a sheet called product sheet and a table called products table. This table includes product name and product cost. The product cost is a percentage of the invoice amount. Therefore, if we sell balls for $100, then our cost is $20, which is 20% of $100. And that leaves us with a cool profit of $80. Now let's check out the sales file. In the sales file, we have a sheet called Sales Sheet and a table called, you guessed it, Sales Table. Similar to our first episode, our table includes invoice ID, invoice date, customer name, product sold, invoice amount, and delivery driver. Now that we've done the overview of the example files, there's only one thing left. In order to use Power Pivot, we need to activate the Power Pivot add-in. To do so, we'll go to File, Options, Add-ins. Where it says Manage, select COM Add-ins, click Go, select Microsoft Power Pivot for Excel, and click OK. And now, the Power Pivot tab appears on your ribbon, and we're all set. Let's stay in our sales file and start creating our data model. As mentioned, we'll be creating our data model inside the sales file. Before we begin, there are 2 questions. What is a data model, and why do we need one? First, in simple terms, a data model is a collection of tables and applicable relationships between those tables. In this example, our data model will consist of 3 tables and 2 relationships, which you'll see is very straightforward. And second, the reason we need a data model is because in Power Pivot, that's where our pivot table gets its data, which is why these pivot tables are so powerful. Okay, let's start building our data model by adding the customers. As we know, they're located in a separate file. So to import them, we'll go to the Power Pivot tab, click on Manage, and this will open the Power Pivot window. Then on the Home tab, choose from other sources, select Excel file, click Next, and browse for the customer file. Make sure to check Use First Row as column headers, click Next, and let's pause on this screen for a second. Here we can see that it's importing the entire customer sheet, because if you remember, we use those descriptive names in our example files. Thus, we can see that the customer sheet is the one being imported, not the table. If the file had multiple sheets, you'd see multiple sheets listed here, and you'd select the one you want. Click Finish, and there you go. The import was a success. Click Close, and now we can see the customers are part of our data model. Let's do the same thing with products. Go to the Home tab and choose from other sources. Select Excel file, click Next, and browse for the product file. And make sure once again to check Use First Row as column headers. Click Next, and once again we can see it's importing the entire sheet. Click Finish. Sometimes a pop-up like this will appear. If you're okay with it, click OK. Click Close. And the products have now been imported into our data model. Lastly, let's add our sales table to the data model. Since that sales table is already in the Excel file, importing it into the data model is even easier. We'll close the Power Pivot window, click anywhere inside the sales table, go to the Power Pivot tab, and click on Add to Data Model. And that's it. The sales import is done. And notice that because the sales table was already inside the Excel file, we were able to import the sales table as opposed to the entire sheet. Now that we've imported the data into our data model, it's important to note that each of these tabs at the bottom are tables inside the data model, and they're distinct from their source Excel sheet or Excel table. And to make sure there's no confusion, we'll rename these by replacing the word sheet and table with DM, which is short for data model. To illustrate how these components interact, we'll do a little diagram. We have the source data, which are the Excel sheets and tables in our example files over here, and the data model tables over there. And between them, there's a connection, which is used to refresh the data from the source to the data model when desired. All right, now that the tables are set up, time to create relationships. In basic terms, think of a relationship as an association between two columns from different tables. To start creating a relationship, go to the Home tab and click on Diagram View. And now we can see our three tables. I'm quickly going to reorganize them so that the customers and products are on the left and the sales are on the right. First, let's focus on the customers and sales table. The customers table has a column called Customer Name, and the sales table has one called Customer. This makes total sense because each sale has to be to one of our customers. To create a relationship, we'll drag the customer name from the customer table to the customer column in the sales table. The type of relationship is automatically determined correctly. And here we have a one-to-many relationship because one customer can appear on multiple invoices. By the way, the asterisk signifies many. Now let's take a look at the products and sales table. Here we can see that the products table has a column called Product, and so does the sales table. This makes sense because we sell products from our product list. So we'll drag product from this table and drop it onto product in the other. And once again, we have a one-to-many relationship because one type of product can be sold many times. And lastly, if we ever forget which columns are related, we can hover over the relationship line and we'll see them highlighted in green. And that's it. We've created our relationships. Time to add new columns. To begin adding new columns, click on Data View to go back to our tables. And make sure you're on the sales table. In this section, we're going to add 3 new columns: cost of goods sold, discount, and profit. To add our first column, double-click on Add Column and type Cost of Goods Sold and press Enter. Note that it can take a few seconds for the new column to process. Next, we'll do the same thing with discount and profit. Perfect. And now that our columns have been added, let's populate each one of them with a formula. For cost of goods, we want the invoice amount in this table multiplied by the product cost in the products table. To do that, we'll double-click on the first cell and start with the equal sign. We'll click on the invoice amount column and add the multiplication sign. Then we'll type related, open parenthesis. This function retrieves information from a related table, and this is possible because in the last section, we created relationships. So now we can use the columns from the customers and products tables as you see listed here. In our case, we'll select cost from the products table, close parenthesis, and press enter. And once again, this can take a few seconds to process. And there you have it, the cost of goods sold for each sale. In case you're wondering, this formula uses the DAX language. And if that rings a bell, it's because it's the same one as Power BI. Thus, you can leverage your DAX knowledge in both places. Now, let's tackle the discount column. If you remember, our customers in expansion markets are identified as preferred customers, and they get a special 10% discount on their purchases. Therefore, our formula will be invoice amount times 10%, but only if they're a preferred customer. To begin, double-click on the cell, and after the equal sign, we'll start with an if statement. Open parenthesis, and for the logical test, we'll type related, open parenthesis, and we'll look for customer type from the customers table, close parenthesis, equals, in between double quotes, we'll type preferred with an uppercase P, comma, and for our true result, click on the invoice amount column and multiply it by 0.1 for 10%, comma, and if the logical test is false, we want to put 0, so we'll type 0 and close parenthesis, and press enter. And there you go, the discount has been applied. Lastly, to calculate profit, the formula is simple. After the equal sign, click on the invoice amount column, minus, click on the cost of goods column, minus, click on the discount column, press enter, and there's our profit for each sale. However, what's our total profit? Time to create some measures and KPIs. First, we'll start by adding a measure. A measure is a calculation. It can do things like sum, count, and average an entire column. In this case, we'll sum the profit column to get the total profit. Once built, we can use our measure with KPIs and in our pivot table. To create a measure, we need to close this window and go to the Power Pivot tab. Click on Measures and select New Measure. We'll choose our sales table and give our measure a name, Total Profit. Next, we'll write our formula, equals sum, open parenthesis, and we'll look for profit in the sales table, close parenthesis. In the formatting options, we'll select number, check the box to use the thousand separators, and reduce decimals to 0, and click OK. Now, before we go back into our data model to check out our new measure, we'll create a KPI for that measure. KPI means Key Performance Indicator, and in our pivot table, it'll provide quick visuals of our current performance in relation to our profit goal. Our profit goal is $1 million per product per customer by 2025. This means that each of these cells should be $1 million in 2 years. So we want to know how close we're getting. In the Power Pivot tab, click on KPI and select New KPI. We'll select Total Profit and select Absolute. Here, we'll set our target, which is $1 million. Then, we'll set our thresholds for our KPIs visual indicators. Any profit $1 million and above will be green. Any profit $700,000 and above, but less than $1 million, will be yellow. And any profit below $700,000 will be red. Lastly, let's select an icon style. I like this one, and click OK. Now, let's go back into our data model to check out our total profit measure and KPI. Click on Manage, and make sure you're on the sales table. At the bottom, you'll see your measure with a little KPI icon. Resize the columns, and there it is, total profit. However, did you know we can create the same measure without having to create an extra column by using something called the SumX function? The SumX function can go through each row of a table, perform a calculation, and sum the results of each row. Let's check out how we can do that. To create our new measure, we'll do it here instead of exiting this window and doing it the way we just did, which would have been fine. First, we'll double-click here and give our measure a name. Total Profit SumX. Then, we'll type : and now we can start writing our formula. Type SumX, open parenthesis. And now for our table, we'll select the sales table because we want our profit calculation to apply to that table's rows, comma. For our expression, we'll do the same thing we did in the profit column. Invoice amount minus cost of goods minus discount, close parenthesis, and press enter. And there it is. The only difference is the formatting, which we can change by right-clicking, selecting Format, applying the same settings, clicking OK, and now they're identical. The advantage of SumX is that we don't need to create that extra column, and this keeps our table clean and decluttered. However, the downside is that, depending on the size of our data set, we may notice slower performance whenever it needs to recalculate. By the way, if you've enjoyed this video so far, please consider subscribing and clicking the like button. A sincere thank you. Now that we've covered measures, where does the KPI fit in? Time to build our pivot table. To build a pivot table, we'll use the same steps as we did in our first episode. First, we need to insert our pivot table. We'll close this window and go to the Insert tab. Then, we'll click on the pivot table down arrow and select from Data Model. Make sure that New Worksheet is selected and click OK. And now we have our empty pivot table. Next, we need to set up our quadrants. In the Field List pane, you'll notice it looks a little bit different. Instead of seeing fields, we see tables from our data model. If we click on the side arrow in the Customers table, we can see that the fields are the original columns. And same thing with the Products table. However, in the Sales table, we can see that it's the original columns and the new columns and measures and KPIs. Also, it's important to note that there are two tabs, Active and All. We're currently in the All tab, which contains all the tables in our data model, and if there were other tables in the Excel file that were not part of our data model, they would also be listed here, and obviously, things could get confusing very quickly. And this is why it's best practice to isolate the tables you need for your pivot table by moving them to the Active tab. In our case, we only need the customers and sales table because even though the product table is part of our data model, we won't need any of the fields for our pivot table. We'll right-click on Customer and select Show in Active tab. And we'll do the same thing for Sales. And now, when we go to the Active tab, there they are. Before setting up our quadrants, remember that our goal is to analyze whether or not we're meeting our profit target of 1 million per customer per product. To do that, we'll go to the Sales table and put Customer and Product in the Rows quadrant. Next, we'll add Invoice Date in the Columns quadrant and remove everything except for years. Staying in the Sales table, we'll drag the total profit measure here in the Values quadrant. And notice that the total profit values retain the same number format we set earlier, which includes 1,000 separators and no decimals. And lastly, we'll drag the total profit status into the same quadrant. And there's our KPI icons indicating how we're doing towards our total profit target. Before we take a closer look at the results, we still have a little work to do to make the pivot table easier to understand. Next, we want to change the name of the KPI column header from Total Profit Status to just Status. To do so, we'll go to the Field List pane in the Values quadrant and select the down arrow for Total Profit Status and select Value Field Settings. And in the custom name, we'll change it to Status, click OK, and there you go. Name changed. Now that the quadrants are set up, we'll move on to the design options. Click anywhere inside our pivot table and go to the Design tab. We'll select the same design as we did in the first episode. Next, we'll go to the Grand Totals and remove the pivot table totals by selecting Off for rows and columns. Perfect! Now, let's check out the Analyze options. Once again, click anywhere inside the pivot table and select the Pivot Table Analyze tab. In the pivot table name, we'll change the name of our pivot table to Profit Analysis. And similar to what we did in the first episode, we'll click on Options and make 3 changes. First, under the Layout and Format tab, we'll uncheck Auto Fit Column Widths on Update so that our column sizes don't change whenever we refresh or update our data. Second, under the Display tab, we'll uncheck Show Expand Collapse buttons to remove the Expand Collapse buttons from our pivot table. And third, we'll uncheck Display Field Options and Filter dropdowns to remove the column labels and row labels along with their dropdown menus. Click OK. Let's tidy this up by resizing the columns and centering the headers. And now we can check out our performance. It's great to see that we have more and more green icons every year. AmeriPro and Can Sports are getting awfully close to meeting that 1 million target for each product. Mex Athletic is a little behind, but this is because they're our newest customer, and I'm confident the sales team will meet our profit target by 2025. The last thing we'll do in the Analyze options is to add a slicer, which is a little bit different when using data models. Click inside the pivot table, go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab, and select Insert Slicer. At the top, you'll see once again that there are 2 tabs, Active and All. By default, the Active tab is selected. We want to find customer type, which is under the Customer table. You'll notice that the Customer table is found in the Active tab. However, if it wasn't, we could go to the All tab and find it there. Select Customer Type and click OK. And now we can filter our data based on customer type. Now it's time for the last component, add new data. In our case, we have two things to add, new sales data and a new customer called Fast Eagle. We'll start with the new sales data. Let's go to the new sales data sheet and copy that data. Then we'll go to the sales sheet, navigate to the bottom of the sales table, and paste it there. And that's it for sales. Now to add our new customer, we'll go to our customers file and copy paste our customer AmeriPro and change the name from AmeriPro to Fast Eagle. We'll save and close to go back to our sales file. Navigate to our pivot table, right-click, and refresh. And there it is, Fast Eagle. Now imagine that over the years we gain a bunch of new customers, and now our pivot table gets too long. So we may want to start summarizing our data based on country instead of customer. To do that, it's easy. In the rows quadrant, we'll remove customer, which was located in the sales table, and we'll replace it with country, which is located in the customers table. And there you have it, breakdown by country. So let's take a moment to think about what we've built here. We have a pivot table analyzing total profit, which is a measure that uses parts of the customers, products, and sales table. It's broken down by country from the customers table, and further broken down by product from the sales table. And to top it off, we have a customer type slicer from the customers table. And this is why Power Pivot is awesome. And that's it for our tutorial. Quick recap. We created our data model using data from multiple files. We added relationships between the customers and sales table and the products and sales table. We added new columns for cost of goods, discounts, and profits. We added measures for KPIs for total profit. And we built a pivot table leveraging all of these components. Alright, that's it for our tutorial. In our next episode, we'll cover Power Query, a powerful tool that allows you to combine, clean, and transform data. I hope to see you there, and best of luck on your automation journey.